we went through COVID and saying, okay, let's take what we learned 9/11, let's take what we learned from GFC and start to apply and say, okay, which aircraft are going to be watched out?
This is the Time on Wing podcast. Welcome back. I'm Courtney Builder with Visual Approach Analytics. With me, as always, Garrick Deschavon of Collateral Verifications. Garrick, who are we talking to today?
Today we are talking to Bryson Monteleone. Bryson is a good friend of ours, and so it's going to be fun to chat with him. He's currently senior advisor for the Aviation Finance Advisory Services at PwC Ireland. So he deals with a lot of various clients, kind of telling them what he thinks they should do. But before that, he was director for Tailwind Capital Partners. He was also chief marketing officer, I think, for 10 years or so at Mort Beyer and Agnew. And prior to that, before he actually started in aviation, he was actually working, I think it's administrative DI, I guess, and legislative staff for the U.S. Senate, which is kind of cool. So yeah, he was actually in politics, which is, I know, it's actually pretty cool. So it'd be kind of nice to hear his transition. He did graduate from American University with a BS in political science and got his MBA in international finance and marketing from American University. As an ISTAT appraiser myself, it was also great to have him as the chair and presidente of the appraiser program. He did that for, I think, overall 6 years, which was very good. He did a great job. And he is also now the chair for the ISTAT Sustainability Committee. So it's going to be a lot of fun to kind of get his thoughts on what's going on and get his take on his background. And I think he's also a private pilot because I know he flies around. So, yeah. So I think he's got aviation in his blood like the rest of us, but it's going to be great. So Bryson, this is your time on wing.
Just a quick intermission before we continue with the show. We do get a lot of questions about how our listeners can support the show, and frankly, the easiest way is to continue the spirit of the show, which is just to reach out to us at conferences. But we also run businesses as well, and you can support us by supporting a lot of the work that we do. You can support the work that I do through Visual Approach by visiting visualapproach.io, where we produce a lot of research and analysis, a lot of data visualizations.
From my side, obviously, I focus more on the metals, so anything that's aircraft related, if you're looking for valuations, whether it's on aircraft engines, I'm happy to help with any of those types of projects. So we appreciate certainly the opportunities to work with all of you. And we certainly also appreciate just the fact that people are willing to listen to what we have to say and enjoy kind of our thoughts and takes on what we think is a fascinating industry. So thank you.
Okay, back to the show.
Bryson, thank you very much for being on with us today. It's great to have you. So one of the things that we always do with our guests is we'd love to hear how you got your start in aviation, because I know you've got a little bit of a dip in background. It sounds like you started your education career path in one direction and then you switched. So I'd love to get your take on how you got to where you are today.
Picture it, Sicily, 1985. No,
85.
85. No,
BS.
Okay. So yes, let's take that a little bit further. So let's go to 1991. Great question. And I think it's an interesting story in the sense of just how I started in politics when I got to Washington, D.C. Somehow was able to work for the Democratic Party on the Senate side, did the work for the DSCC, and then helped run statewide campaigns in Virginia. The second campaign of that was a guy named Don Beyer, who is the nephew of Mort Beyer, who is of Mort Beyer and Agnew, MBA.
Oh, wow.
And so it kind of started from there. We lost. We lost the governor's race in 1997. And Don said, "Hey, my uncle's got this aviation consulting firm. Are you interested?" And I was like, could not get out of there fast enough. I said, "Yes, absolutely. This is awesome. This would be a great transition." And I'll park that there because when I came back to Washington D.C., I was applying for jobs in airlines, whatever, and I don't know why, because aviation just kind of fit right, and I think they said, "Oh, come apply to work at the Admirals Club at Dulles." Well, I was think 19 years old, and Dulles Airport, when you live in downtown DC, is about 80 miles away. It's only 20, but getting out there to and from wasn't appealing, to say the least.
It's 80 miles by DC standards.
Right, exactly.
And there was no metro,
back then,
no express lanes, right?
Well, there was an express lane, but back then, Dulles Airport might as well have been Timbuktu, because you would go out there and you're like, what the hell is out here? There is nothing. And now there is a whole... you guys have been out there. It's a whole metropolis. The whole kind of path to Dulles is its own little kind of suburban area. So it worked out kind of to the better. But I will also say that I worked in the United States Senate for a couple of years. I worked for one senator. Really hasn't made much of his life. Named Joe Biden. He hasn't done much. So I worked for him for a year and a half, and he's tried. He really has tried. Like, he just didn't do much. So no, but that was fun, and I loved. It was a different world back then. This is not a political discussion, so we'll park that there. But worked for MBA, and then I got my MBA during my working in MBA, and I honestly didn't realize I'd stayed MBA for 10 years. Like, it was a great experience, and working for Mort Beyer was, there's things I can say that I won't repeat on this podcast. Maybe the three of us could, have a pint or two over this, but he was, listening. At first, I cursed listening to him on speakerphone in the beginning, because I was like, here is this guy on the speakerphone. But honestly, the people he was talking to on speakerphone, and his office was right next to mine. And he was talking to all the luminaries in the industry, and they'd call him up and be like, Mort, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Well, and he had the benefit of hindsight and the knowledge of the industry. And he's like, well, this is going to happen. And I'm like, God, and it just did. Like, 40 years in the industry, and you guys were seeing the same thing now. We're now those people that kind of look back, and you gave me, I'll say you prefaced some questions, and I noticed that, kind of look at the benefit of our longevity in this industry is the fact that we can see trends before they happen, and we've now been through 3 down cycles now, and he had been through probably 20. This is a guy who started Braniff, he started Pan Am, like the beginning of commercial aviation, and he just knew the trends, and he'd write about things. I'm like, what is he talking about? And just was able to just pontificate so well, and listening to his, I miss those days. It was other favorite story of Mort, just as a side story, because I find it kind of funny, is that our offices were in Tyson's Corner, and it was a lot of construction. They were building a lot of buildings around us, and we all had desktops, and this is not a barking dog, and this is early 2000, like late 90s, early 2000s, and the power would go out all the time. Like, we'd lose power, and so we'd be like, and he'd just be like typing away in his typewriter, just laughing and chuckling, like, he's just going around his, Smith Corona, 100, whatever it is, and just typing away, and it was a treat. And
did he have a light switch near him? Like, did he have direct access to the power switch? Did anybody ever think to ask that?
Right?
He was the one. He's like, watch this.
Like,
watch this. Listen,
just
you
kidding.
can hear him scream.
Yeah. Especially in the winter at like 4 p.m. when it gets dark. He's like, watch this.
Oh, yeah. No, he the man, for those who don't know him, like, he stood 7 feet tall. Like, he was the abominable snowman. And he was, I don't remember, Garrick, if you remember this, back in the day of the commercial aviation report, and there were some scandalous articles about appraisers that just happened to come out in the summer of 2001. And then we had the car conference in Tyson's Corner on 9/11, 2001. And I was up on stage talking about whatever panel I was on, some aircraft values panel, and he was in the audience, and he was prepared to stand up during my thing and start going after the author of that article. And lo and behold, some other events happened that day, but he was going to stand up and just start blasting kind of obviously defending the appraiser program because he was chair of the appraiser program at that time.
Yeah.
But I'm like, do you have to do it on my panel? Can't we just wait until there's some other? Like, I'm just talking about 767s. Really, this is the aircraft of the day. Do we have to
so
get into this?
listen, I'm going to sabotage a panel. It'll be great.
I'm going to sabotage my own, staff.
It's yours.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
that's right. It's yours because I know you, so I don't want to be. I don't want to do it to the other guys. Yeah,
Because that would be rude.
Yes, exactly. Right.
That'd
That'd be bad sport. Thanks.
yeah. Which I'm trying to think. So because I was at CIT at the time, right? So I went to that conference, but I don't know if I really ever met Mort in person. Like I'm sure, obviously, I saw him, but I don't think I had the chance to meet him. But yeah. But I didn't realize he was kind of part of the whole Pan Am Braniff, like.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean.
Yeah.
I mean, ironically, there was just news, that Carl Icahn just got fined for not disclosing stuff. Carl Icahn would call all the time. He would call him up and be like, "Mort," because that was ex-TWA, like all that lineage, and just the people he talked to were just fascinating, and they all knew him, like because again, he was 7 feet tall, so you really couldn't miss him, and But good times. Good
so
times.
what was your because you said you were MBA for 10 years. So what was kind of your roles within those 10 years, right, while you were there?
So I was brought on as kind of an administrative director, and I did best in kind of running the ships at that time. I had no appraisal experience whatsoever. I had my knowledge and love for aviation, my interest in aviation, but never, really got to put it to use to any kind of professional capacity. And so I was brought on to they had just lost their, I guess, controller, treasurer, or whatever, and they just need somebody to kind of keep the books. And when I worked on the Hill and I worked in campaigns, I never did policy. I wasn't doing legislation. I was the guy who was kind of running the money. So that was my capacity in the beginning. And then obviously MBA was a very small company at that time, 7 people, of which only like 3 or 4 people did appraisals. And it was, here, do this appraisal. And I'm like, what the hell are you doing? And it was, and I think we can talk about this now, but that was the first appraisal I ever did. I got sued for $25 million. So it was
awesome. Great way to
the
start.
Industry.
Yeah.
Bend over. Yeah. So it was, we had done an appraisal for a particular leasing company. And it was, anybody who knows, when I start talking about the metal that was involved, DC-8, 707, 727s, L-1011s, like back then it was new and chic. This is the late 90s. So, and we did the appraisal, and it was used to do for a divestment of equity. And then 10 months later, we had to do the appraisal again because they wanted to audit it. And in that time, this portfolio was subject to a lot of exposure to L-1011s. And so this was also the time when there was an L-1011 consortium in the market to come together and say, let's keep the L-1011 going in some form of shape or form, either or passenger or cargo. And between Lockheed, Rolls-Royce, the only engine maker at that time on the L-10, and the L-10 operators, Rolls-Royce wouldn't come down on the shop visit costs on 3 engines. So you had a airframe that was worth about $2 or $3 million, if that, and you had 3 engines that each required about a $3 to $4 million shop visit. So do the math. It destroyed the program, and so of course values dropped to the and never recovered. And in doing so, that the company that hired us said that we were kind of somehow in collusion with the person that was divesting of equity, and they came after us. It's like, but every appraiser has dropped their values. Like, so it was a little bit interesting. But yeah, let's see, back then I rented a townhouse in Arlington. I owned a Chevy Tahoe and a TV. So that was like, come after it, guys. Like, this is what you got. So take my Sony personally. Yes.
They came after you personally?
I was named defendant. So the company, and then Mort and I were each put as named defendant. So I'm like, is this where my career is going? I'm going to be like already taken to task.
That's right. I told you I didn't want to do this appraisal.
What is this appraisal crap? I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah.
Where's that admiral's sub job? But
it is way underestimated just how hard collusion is. It's like hard. It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. Yeah.
It's easier to just make things up.
Yeah, that's what appraisals are. You just make things up.
Like, listen, you're coming after me for the wrong stuff here.
Yeah. So, all right. So I've got a question based on that, right? So when you think about your 10 years at MBA, right? You obviously got more and more involved with appraisals.
Yep.
You got
Yep.
what point did you get ISTAT certified? Were you still at MBA at that point?
Just towards the end. Yeah, right. I started. So remember, I don't know if you were caught up in this, Garrick, but I applied for my candidacy, and in the olden days, you could apply and take the exams next go round, and then that was when, right at that point, it was like, oh no, you have to wait a year. So I just got right at the tail. I got the right. So I applied for my candidacy. And then I remember talking to Bill Cumberledge, and I'm like, what gives? Like, why can't I take the exams, in March? And he said, nope, we got it. We're waiting a year. Everybody's waiting a year. So now I had to wait a year and then took my exams. And listen, I didn't pass the first time all the way. The exams are not designed to be easy. So it took a couple of tries. And I think ironically, I had left MBA by the time I was certified. So it must have been 2008, 9.
Okay.
Yeah.
So around the same. Yeah, I think around the same time, because I think I remember taking the exams for the first time with you as well. So I think we were kind of going through. I didn't pass the first time either, and kind of went through. But I mean, I will say at that point, I think it was during the time when, in order to know what to study on the exam, you had to take the exam to better understand what was on it. And then that was also when, each year things would change in terms of, one year was like, oh, you can have the handbook. When I took it, it was like, oh, by the way, you're not using the handbook. And I'm like, what do you mean?
Right.
I thought I could. No, we're not doing that this year. Okay. I'm like, come on.
Oh, you had to memorize all this stuff. And you're like, I memorize what? Yes.
Yeah. So
kids these days, they have it so easy. They have a handbook and they even get a calculator.
The program has come a long way, and that's a lot of it is thanks to you. But so I guess my question with all of that is, so when you think about, your tenure at MBA and how appraisals have changed over the last, 25 years, right? What are you seeing? A lot of differences in terms of how people go about it, or what's changed from that standpoint?
You mean as far as just approach to appraising, or what appraisals are required for, or what?
No, more about the approach, right? In terms of if you think about how you were doing things, in a time when I think data was not as readily available from the standpoint of just like fleet data, right? Or that kind of stuff. I mean, there's still a lack of transparency, but if you think about what you were able to use back then versus what's out there today.
You mean the abacus? You mean I had to use my slide ruler? Yes.
Damn it, Bryson. I
knew
had
you were
the
going to
joke.
go, well, back in your day, you had to use pencils and an abacus, right?
The stone tablet.
Listen,
How do you...
Courtney, I got your number. The internet. What is that? I don't know.
That's right. Yeah.
I had to fax things.
Yeah.
Yes.
We didn't have the internet. Yeah. We had to use discs.
But you know what? You kind of say that jokingly. Let's look at the early 2000s. I mean, the internet, yes, it was far from mature compared to what was, and the information that was on there. And obviously, look at all the things now that are just the historical construct of files that are put on the internet for sake of memorialization and historical requirements, just because you need these databases to exist in perpetuity. To that end, I would say obviously the availability of information is much more voluminous, and I think the approach is, everything's at your fingertips. I mean, literally, you could probably go onto AI, a chat and say, write an appraisal on a 73800, and it'd come up with a semblance of reasonableness.
I'm the appraiser.
Right. I have this. I went through. Yeah, listen, Garrick, you and I. How many times we had to sit for the senior exam together? It felt like 80. But yeah. No, the approach is different. I think. Anytime you have to. Plus, also, anytime you have to do something manually, abacus. You learn more, and I think what is being left behind is probably sometimes that ability, that complexity of doing things manually, the adjustments, the review of the numbers. Every time you put, air between yourself and that the ability to really know the numbers and how it works, I think you start to lose a little bit of that, fidelity.
Yeah. Which I could totally see that. I think, today's appraisers that are coming in, right? I mean, they have access to a lot of different things, and it's more just kind of like, all right, just piecemeal, like click, 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 put it all together, and there you go, without having to do, what do you mean I got to pick up the phone and call somebody to ask them what they think about this airplane, right?
Oh my God.
Right?
Can I just text them? Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Exactly. You got to text them, or it would be like, all right, now go to this book and figure out what's the availability on these airplanes, right? And then look through books. Things like, which obviously there's much more data, but it's, there is something that I think is lost there a little bit.
ChatGPT did it.
ChatGPT.
So I asked ChatGPT, can you write up an appraisal for a 10-year-old A320-200 with V2500 engines? It says, certainly, here it is. And it says, it goes through each of the items, and then it puts so it says configuration. And then in brackets, it says specify configuration, right? Ooh. So it says, okay, here's the template. Now say something smart inside the brackets. So you're still got a job.
Yeah. I know. Well, what was it? Was it last year when somebody was asking about for the appraiser panel? Somebody asked about AI. Do we think that AI, as appraisers, do we think AI is going to take over? And I was like, no. There's so much nuance, so much ambiguity.
Need to know,
yeah.
And you need to know also. To that point, Courtney, like you put in some. It's asking ChatGPT or whatever medium you're using with the right question. Half the battle is writing the right prompt to get the right response. And
listen, guys, AI is going to take over everything. In fact, you thought this whole time you were talking to Courtney. Turns out, no.
If it wasn't for you dreaded kids, I would have gotten away with it. Yes.
Yeah, I think this is. Not to sidelight us on AI. I'm totally fascinated by what it can't do, actually. And this is exactly an example. Like, you think that absolutely it should be able to come up with a dollar figure. That's not what appraisers do. It's the nuance. It's the direction. And this applies to so many other. I think we're a little bit past peak AI, if I'm being frank.
You think so? You think?
I do.
Really? Aren't we just starting? The universe is massive. Should I be selling my NVIDIA stock? Is that what you're saying?
I do think we're a little bit past peak AI. You're for the people who are frontline AI developers, you're starting to see what happens when the AI models run out of authentic data to train on. Right? We're seeing that now. The next models are not as good, and it's not the law of diminishing returns. The problem is that the models can be more accurate, but it's using the same data, but they just need data to ingest. So they're starting to ingest their own data, their own output.
Well, that's it. And that's the issue.
And that's a real problem.
Yep.
Right? The snake eating its tail, that whole thing. And they've run, like you can see these images just for using the AI image generation. They run it back through the model over and over again, and it turns to gibberish.
Yep.
So it doesn't know what to do. So we've kind of reached our potential with that, and then the models themselves haven't learned how to truly extrapolate. We call it generative. They're interpolating based on the data we give them. And anyway, that gets more technical than anything, but I do think we're slightly past that peak.
Interesting. Yep. No, listen, it's I guess we could do a whole podcast on this, but it is a.
You still have a job. That's the
right now.
That's the TLDR.
Yeah. At this point, we're still safe. Yes, exactly.
Even though during our last recorded podcast, I think we nailed the actual inner workings of being appraiser. And it's 3 steps in various combinations. 1, Control C, Control V, and occasionally Control Z. And that's it. That's all you got to do. That's where the CV comes from in collateral verifications.
Oh, I thought it was something else.
Right. Well, this was fun. Thank you very much for being on the podcast.
Wait, this is a podcast about Bryson, not about Garrick.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I can't divulge all my secrets all the time. But so, going back to you a little bit, so what happened with the transition in terms of, so when you were done with MBA, right? What made you transition to Tailwood Capital, which was very much more, asset management, asset sales, that kind of, right? You were doing that kind of work, if I remember correctly, from Tailwind.
What's interesting about Tailwind was that Tailwind was married up with Bank of America, like in Merrill Lynch back then, those days, and it was a program to convert CRJ 200s back into Challenger 850s. So
that's
that was
Flying Colors, right?
Yeah. So no, that was a different. Flying Colors was a different program. The Hemisphere 200XR was our program, and so we got to become our own little OEM for a bit, and we were out there. So what had happened is I'd sold a CRJ 200 to Tailwind Capital, or at least Merrill Lynch at that point, and then it was a great transaction. It took a little bit longer, but that CRJ 200 was going to be converted back into a corporate jet. And it was really intriguing because it was a marrying of both the business jet side of things, which I didn't have exposure to, using the commercial jet kind of side of the house. And that was, so it was really fascinating. We already had a handful of aircraft that nobody else did. So we were ready to go, except for the fact that our conversion facility really stumbled on the STC. And so we couldn't get the STC out in time, lost traction. Oh, and here comes the global financial crisis. And here comes the downward spiral of ultra high net worth individuals. And so what would have been a great program, because the backlog for the 850 was 18 months. People were clamoring to get this aircraft. Here's something you get for a third of the price, same aircraft. And I don't think we realized as a regional jet, obviously the CRJ, is what it is. But when it stands against other business jets, it was a very big aircraft. We went down to Georgetown, Delaware, to the PATS facility, sat in there for hours on end trying to do the interior designing of these things. And there's a lot of space you have to fill. So it was a lot of fun, that until it kind of cratered, and then the market really went upside down. And then other opportunities came along for remarketing A320s and some other things. And we did some sale leaseback opportunities with some of the airlines. So yeah, it was a boutique advisory. It was a lot of fun. But I'll tell you, it was tough. It was going through the global financial crisis with a boutique advisory firm, not having a steady paycheck. Learned a lot, but it was challenging. And so the opportunity with PwC came along. Notice I only joined companies with 3 letters: MBA, TWC, and PwC. 4 letters, very complicated. And that was an opportunity I couldn't pass up, because it was bringing expertise, industry expertise, to a Big Four accounting firm that needed a bench of experts, especially on the valuation side and the metal. So that was a unique opportunity, and it's been a lot of fun. That's been now 6.5 years being there, and it's been great. A lot more times to Ireland, which is kind of a second home now, and it's been a really rewarding experience.
In terms of the stuff that you do with PwC now, can you tell us a little bit more about that in terms of what's kind of your typical client base? What are the services that you guys do? Just what's your day to day?
Yeah, no, thanks. We are almost essentially a boutique consulting firm inside a massive Big Four accountancy. So my team is called Aviation Finance Advisory Services. We sit within tax, leveraging relationships.
That's 4 letters.
I know, but that's just a team within a 3-letter company. So just slow your roll down.
We'll let it slide.
Slow it down. And AFAS, as we are known, Hush. And we are a group within the tax team to leverage relationships that PwC has within aviation tax, which is everybody, because either we audit them or we do tax services. And those services come into portfolio due diligence, transactional support. Right now we're doing sell side for a lessor looking for a new equity investor. We sold an MRO last year. We're supporting airlines going through a privatization. So it really is, as someone who has mild ADHD, every day is different, to be honest. And then there's the SME support we provide the network on the audit side with the valuation to help the audit teams better understand the asset, the nuances of kind of where aircraft markets go and valuations go. Especially that was really intrinsic during COVID, right? I mean, it was something we'd never seen before, and kind of keeping people from jumping off the ledge was kind of the appropriate, hey, we have a tool here to look at values in a different way. It's industry accepted. Obviously, there were certain circumstances by which things had to be taken care of and impairments had to be made because of the circumstances of disposition of an aircraft at a certain time during a global pandemic. But you have to do a mark to market on that. But the cool thing is that there's 200,000 employees in this firm, and the aviation network, we probably have, I would say globally, there's more than a few hundred, probably close to 1,000 aviation people in the firm, but nobody does what I do with my team, which is aviation finance and the investor side. So we have, IT solutions and lots of larger, bigger, more complex accounting and tax. But when it gets down to what the three of us do and the market we play in, it's very unique. It's very specific. And due to COVID, the elevation, the promise of this team really grew because people said, "Oh wait, we need the leasing people," and they'd pull us in, and really kind of integrate with the network, which was helpful because that really spotlighted capabilities that, hey, and I get on network calls. You'd be like, "Why are you part of the Irish team? Why aren't you part of the U.S. team?" Because, well, there's nobody in the U.S. team that does what we do. Ireland is the nexus for aviation finance. This is the logical step, and this is the logical placement for this team. So it's been a lot of fun. And everyone loves aviation, and it's part of it. And it's been an ability to really network with a great amount of people who service so many different facets of the industry.
I'm going to go back to a question that Garrick asked, but I want to ask it better.
Oh, really?
Well, no. So he asked about how appraisals have changed, and you asked, do you mean how the client asked for them, or kind of the approach? So you've answered the approach, but I'm quite interested in how kind of the clients, like how the appraisals are used, what that side of the industry has come to rely on the appraisers for. How has that changed?
No, that's a good question.
Did you hear that, Garrick?
Yeah, you hear that?
I got the good question.
I took what you did, but I made it better.
Yeah, don't worry. I'm used to it. That's all right. I let it go.
That's fine.
That's
you
right.
don't feel emasculated, right? Like,
I'm
just
just going to say,
payback's
a, you know what? You just,
right, exactly.
Don't worry. I'll get my turn.
Well, and Garrick, you can tap in on this too, because you're in the same kind of in the same paradigm. I think the valuations have become so. Let's just back up for a second. Returns on the industry and margins on investments are so more compressed and so more granular. So now, when you pull in the valuation perspective and the necessity to forecast to the nth degree and to value to the nth degree, and I'm not saying that Garrick and I are valuing aircraft down to the cents, but the number becomes a more intrinsic factor to the investment thesis. And I think you also get more educated customers too. There are a lot of investors who are very smart, who are asking the right questions, and it's refreshing. And I think that has come along. And I'll pat myself on the back on this, because one of the reasons why I wanted to become chair of the appraiser program was to enlighten people as to what we do. And for the longest time, it was, oh, you guys just go sit in a room and have the black box and eat cookies every day at the ISTAT conference, and you come out and I said, it's more than that. I mean, we're doing
the cookies were definitely good.
Listen, don't get me wrong, because the cookies are great.
That's why I go for the cookies.
I go for the cookies, yes, and contentious debate amongst my appraiser brethren.
Sure, yeah.
Yes.
But I think to that end, I mean, the models that are being used to value investment, opportunities are so insane. I mean, like going and there are people who are so smart that can take this, and where we do have that subject matter expertise on the valuation, forecasting, the maintenance buildup, all the costs that go into that, break that down, build it back up again. I think to that point, Courtney, the valuation approach is so much more granular, and in order to get the hurdle of return, that precision has to be a little more defined.
What do you mean by granular? Do you mean like even down to like individual? I'll say structures instead of parts, because I couldn't imagine. But like engines obviously have become a much greater percentage of the overall value of the aircraft over time, over the past couple of decades. But what about the landing gear? What about the APU? What about those kind of major structures? Is that what you mean by granularity, or am I completely
that's part of it? I think it's part of it, and it is that breakdown and build up of value, and getting called kind of really address, like, because it is a science wrapped in a nuanced basis of why is my value different from Garrick's value, right? And yet we're supposed to be using the same definitions.
Sure.
Our methodologies might differ. The data points might differ that support what we're trying to do, and how you look at it. And I think what's interesting is that right now, like the particular project I'm working on right now, I had to go and work through values from a lens of a buyer versus a seller. All right. So, and then the highest and best use aspect of, well, you have a fleet that is a handful of aircraft are parked, not serviceable. What's the value? What's the hypothetical value of those aircraft were put back into service? Right? What's the forecast of that value in 5 years' time? What's the value should they be broken down and parted out? What's the value for the current airframes without engines? What's the value? So it's not as just macro as it used to be. Like here, we have to actually really take part of the definitions, and use them for the purpose, fit for purpose for what you're doing. And I think that is why Garrick and I can have two different values, because maybe we've been asked to appraise the same fleet, the same portfolio through different lenses. And I think that's what people forget, is that it's all what you ask for. And that was part of the education process of how people and the rest of, let's just say the ISTAT community, because we are the community that deals with all this, approaches appraisals. Like it's almost like ChatGPT. Like what you put in is what you get out. If you ask Garrick to give you a base value of an aircraft and say, Garrick, give me a base value of A320 Neo 2021 build, and then somebody asked me to get the current market value adjusted, they're both values, they're both valid, but they're different.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, no, it's true. I think, as you said, I think the level of, education that people have, that comes from investors has definitely gotten better. And I think part of that is, when you think about a lot of the investment firms or even leasing companies, they've been very good at actually bringing people on board that have had good experience, that know kind of what to look for. Because I think over time, people have figured out, if we get this one thing wrong on this airplane, that could be the return that we thought we were going to make is gone, right? And so, enough people, I think, got hurt over time to have that understanding of like, okay, so we need to ask more questions. And I think that's hopefully, as an appraisal community, I think hopefully we're also, I think we're doing a better job of educating the markets to be able to say, look, here's kind of the things that we know. Here are the things to look out for. Like, you should be asking more questions, because if you ask me for what's the value of a 2010 A320, I'll give you a number. If you tell me what's the value of a 2010 A320 MSN, blah, 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 and here are the specs, that's going to be a different value. Right. And if you don't know the difference, then, all of a sudden if you just ask for one simple number at the front, you're going to be like, oh, well, that's not what I'm not buying this airplane for this much, or I'm not selling it for this much, or leasing it for, and you go, okay, yeah, but that, a lot more than I do about what you're buying or selling or leasing. And the number I just gave you doesn't take into account any of that. Right. And so, that's, I think that's the biggest thing, is the educating people to understand what to ask. And I think people have gotten better over time. And that's why I think that there's definitely, when you talk about granularity, I think that's where it comes from, because now all of a sudden people are not only just looking at assets going, all right, so where is, it's an airplane on lease, here's the cash flow, right? And here's the future value. And we're just going to, run a PV, but this is what we think it's worth. Now it's more about, that's one piece of it. But then people also understand the back end is also really important to kind of know, all right, so where do we think we're going to be? What part of the cycle? Should we start looking at, like, what's the part out value of these? Can we lease engines? Can we not? Like, what's the, are we going to be able to release the airplane? And is there reconfiguration costs with that? Or, like, there's so many more things that people take into account, because ultimately, these assets are long-term, long-life assets, right?
Well,
and
it's sophistication is required. And I think at that point, the questions are more sophisticated. And to that point, that forecasting of the exit, I think, Courtney, the exit paradigm is so much more intrinsic than it used to ever be. That's where the money's being made. Is that exit
in the investment itself?
The exit of the asset, whether it's going to be a P2F, it's going to be a part out, it's going to be drop the engines, lease them, part out the aircraft, part out the airframe. That calculus is much more intrinsic than it's ever been before.
Good, and that's good for what you guys do. Although I think there's definitely, like, you can see that happening, right? Just the structure of the leasing industry has pushed so much of that value. The spreadsheet that is the deal before they close the deal has never been more affected by the residual value than it is today. I'm making that up, but it feels that way, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's such a big piece of it.
And so that just puts more value on what you guys do. That's interesting. So if we consider that a long-term trend, how would you describe kind of the impact of COVID in how that affected kind of the, not the calculus, but more the approach? I'm interested from the client perspective, and in how maybe some pressures that you received during COVID when somebody wanted value on something that was not trading at all, or, I mean, how did that impact the whole calculus?
Yeah, and I think in COVID, we always knew, as severe as it was, the resiliency of the segment would return. So, and that's where we really had to rely on base value, because we knew that there was an intrinsic value of that asset above the spot market value. Like, if you
did everybody think that?
What?
Did everybody think that? Or did some people maybe overdo it? like if we went out there and we were doing this and saying even the appraiser program would go out and say, let's survey all the appraisers and say, what has changed market value? Market values were a shit show. Yeah. But negative
base values weren't changing. Yeah. And people are like, when are you going to change base values? We're going to change base values. It's like, yes, let's park that for a second and go, like, after 9/11, right? 9/11 was a good example of really washing out a generation of aircraft. I mean, before 9/11, you had 737-200s flying, a lot of DC-9s, 727s. Mm-hmm. After 9/11, those just got washed out of the system. Like, they went down and they never came back. The MD-80s came back to some degree, because they're just they needed that lift still, and they were still of a younger generation. Mm-hmm. So we went through COVID and saying, okay, let's take what we learned 9/11. Let's take what we learned from GFC and start to apply and say, okay, which aircraft are going to be washed out? And we said, okay, fine. Those were hitting up against heavy checks, run-out engines would be washed out. They were parked, and then they've come back because we didn't know the OEM supply chain would be so upside down that coming out of COVID, all of a sudden, the secondary market, they couldn't get enough lift. And you couldn't get enough aircraft back in the system, even though, okay, now we have an MRO supply chain issue. We have the inability to put engines through induct and overhaul in a timely fashion, like we were pre-COVID. So, what does that mean for the actual resiliency of the metal? But and then wide bodies, right? Like some wide bodies were down for the count before COVID, right? And all of a sudden, you're like, I'm telling my colleagues in certain cases, okay, these types are never going to come back. Well, never is a very strong word. Never in the sense that as things stand right now, COVID abates, and we are now looking at a supply chain of new aircraft of new A330s, new 777Xs, A350s, 787s. These types really don't have a home. Well, they do now, and we can't ever say, this is a learning point. More so, just like 9/11, just like the GFC. So, did that answer your question?
Yeah. Well, it introduced a ton of others, but no, this is a fascinating conversation because so what fleets were probably washed out during COVID? I think you could probably argue the 767 was pushed finally to cargo. Right?
Not all of it, though. Not
Delta
all of it.
And United, and
they're still operating those damn things. Like I fly those things all the time, and it's older A330s. Those we thought those would go out. Now A340s. Okay, well, say even A340s have come back.
Yeah. The 600s.
Yeah, right. A330,
there were a lot to begin with.
They're coming back. I would say coming back. I think they're going to be put in service until the new kit comes, but the new kit is still a couple ways off. What else do we lose? I think the classic 737s are probably gone. Some freighters still exist.
Those shifted towards the freighter side, right? I mean, there was the boom, so all of a sudden the classic freighters did really well, and that pushed into the NG freighters, which everybody was like, okay, that's going to replace the classics. But then they
will. But
they will, right? I mean, in the next 5 years, to me, I think 5-10 years, the classic
engine
freighters
life on the classics, right? Yeah, like how long can a CF56-3C last? I mean, how much
when you
lead time
have
do you
one shop that does the one or two shops that do the engines. That's what ultimately drives, I think, a lot of the retirements. But I think a great point that both of you made is I think the way that people look at how, whether it's a downturn or an uptick or whatever it is, like the variances that there could be, right? And so, I think, and those are the learning curves in terms of, for everybody, in terms of looking at the market going, all right, you're going into COVID, things are bad. What have we learned from the past? And we look at it and you go, do we need to make big adjustments as appraisers to curves? And everybody looks at that a little bit differently, right? And through COVID, you had some appraisal firms that kind of went through and adjust their base value curves earlier on because they felt, hey, you know what? Yeah, these are going to be done. They're never going to come back. And now they're probably looking at that going, we probably have to readjust them upwards again because things are actually much better than we anticipated. We didn't see the OEM supply issues, all these different things. And now all of a sudden the market values are a lot higher than base. So we got to make an adjustment there, right? And so there is some question behind that.
But it's temporary, though. But it's temporary.
It is.
And I would say one and Garrett, tell me if you disagree. One aircraft that has really still struggled to come back, 777-200. It really has not. You think that? It's a fantastic aircraft, but it really has not made a resurgence like the A330 has. The 300 I think was, to your point, benefited from belly freight. Was a natural praetor, if you will. The aircraft were still in service. A330s had a harder time coming back because a lot of them were in deep freeze storage and took a little bit longer to get through the system to get back into service. The demand for
China
freighter
too.
Sorry.
A lot were in China as well.
Exactly. Yeah. So you had
Even
a whole
though
region.
and they had a domestic use for them, but not as many. So in China's unique in the COVID conversation.
Yeah. But the 300ER, to your point, like vis-a-vis, like look at Emirates. All they have are A380s and triples. So
Yeah, it was
they
the
had to
regional
bring
jet.
A380s back. They had no choice. Like, okay,
Yeah,
fine,
yeah.
we're going to fly A380s to Manchester, and now they just bought them all from Doric. Like they just bought 5 from Doric for roughly $40 million apiece, and they're going to they're going to have to run them just like 747s are run out. And then what is Emirates going to do? Okay, fine, the 777Xs they'll take whenever those aircraft do enter into service. Sometimes it's just by the fact that that's all they had. Like, remember Lufthansa, Air France got rid of theirs. Lufthansa was going to do the same. They brought them back. BA brought a handful back.
Mm-hmm.
Etihad and Qatar these will never fly again. Qantas, they're never going to fly again. Well, now they're back. Yeah. But they're never going to come back into manufacture. Like that would just be, I can't see that happening.
Yeah, right. No. Yeah, I mean, and I think to me, I think the benefit of the 300ER, the 777 300ER, was when you think about the operator base, they were all top tier carriers, right? And there was so when you add that to the fact that they had really nothing to replace it with. I mean, it's either you can go maybe A350-1000, but that really that's a big shift. Do you want to do that? Or are you still going to wait for the 777-9? So all of a sudden it was like, we're just going to keep these, and we're just going to reconfigure.
And you had an engine that works.
And you had an engine that works.
Like you had an engine.
Yeah.
That
up until now
was right.
Because now
probably still had tons of green time on it. LOP stacks were still tons of life.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they are a handful to do a shop visit on, but it's a known technology that I think airlines are not afraid to invest in.
Especially now, especially when the new technology, and granted, I mean, we're seeing this on the wide body side as well, right? But just talking about engines, the new technology is basically trading fuel burn for shop visits, right?
Yep.
And I'm pretty sure that I haven't analyze exactly how much of this is the case, but I'm pretty sure there's a not 0% of thrust that is generated from the aircraft from it burning its own LLPs and ejecting them out the back. Like I'm convinced it's actually like burning itself and producing thrust.
Burning itself. Yeah, that's right. Cannibalization.
That's why
from
the
the
fuel
inside.
Burn so low.
You're one of the things that is now also, as part of the things that you do is you talk about, you're part of the ISTAT Sustainability Committee. Mm-hmm. And so I'd love to maybe kind of get into that a little bit. I think it's interesting. It's definitely something that's been more of a kind of a point of focus within the industry, within, the globe. But love to hear more about that in terms of what's your involvement there? What are your thoughts in terms of, do we, depends on the country, right? But as things progress, do you see that kind of being more at the forefront, or does that start to dissipate a little bit? What are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, so I chair it, so I guess I'm part of it. And it is interesting because that committee, it's a board level committee, and it really kind of goes hand in glove with chairing the sustainability symposium that we had in Farnborough last month, and then in Paris last year, and we're probably going to shift that around a little bit. But that committee and just that focus, I'll take this. There's two things to it. The committee is internal and external facing. Internally, to provide topic and support for ISTAT events, and kind of support the ISTAT mechanism as far as being sustainable and what we could leverage and things to invest in as far as events are concerned and what the membership wants. Externally facing, ISTAT doesn't advocate, we're not a lobbying association, so we're really here. We're not going to push out a point of view and say ISTAT believes X, Y, and Z. It really is an education of the membership. We'll highlight things our membership is doing when it comes to sustainability initiatives, hence Sustainability Award. And then educating, if there's papers or white papers that our membership is doing, happy to put them and kind of launch them on the dashboard. People can see it. ISTAT becomes a nexus of information for sustainability. There's no right or wrong as long as it's not marketing propaganda. And to really kind of dive into that as a resource, my hope is that there won't be a sustainability committee too long, because I really just want sustainability to be the normal discourse that we consider going through. Like the sustainability symposium, you don't want to beat the topic to death, but it needs to be out there, and it needs to be. And I'll tell you, even when we had it in London last month, people were in that room the whole time. I mean, we didn't have any attrition of audience attrition. The topics were germane. People are still learning. Yeah, it can be dry. Your eyes roll back in your head sometimes. You kind of like, this is killing me. But we have to talk about CSRD, because everybody has some kind of European touch point of a company of a certain size and number of employees and a net turnover has to start reporting. And that reporting is going to be a report card for every large lessor, every airline, anybody. So all of a sudden, you're going to see yourself lined up with your peers, and it's going to be, oh, crikeys, we don't want to be the last guy on the bottom. We don't want to be the last on the bottom, or the last place to do this. So next year will be very telling, because it'll be the first transparent outlay of information for a reporting directive that goes through over 1,000 KPIs. And not all those KPIs will be applicable to every aviation leasing company, airline, etc. But there will have to be a qualitative and quantitative double materiality assessment, impact financial, for those companies to talk about and walk through why they either are addressing it or are not addressing it, and what does it mean from a financial impact. Okay, fine. Climate change could impact the airline by X, Y, and Z of cost, because tornadoes and hurricanes are prevalent in the northern hemisphere on the months between June and November. This is how much it's going to cost the airline, and that is that climate change could really accelerate and make these storms worse. So it's things like that. But from a sustainability perspective and things that are important to aircraft, it's like what aircraft are actually going to be going forward. We're stuck with the ones we have right now. There are not going to be any electric wide bodies in our lifetime, or at least in our career time.
Did he just call us old?
I didn't have to call you that. Well, when the three of us retire and we get to pass the torch to everybody else, like, you guys deal with this. But yeah, there's not going to be a electric wide body. Maybe, hopefully, we'll get to ride one when in our advanced age. But the regional sector will probably be first and foremost on that hybrid evolution, battery powered, electric, any other hydrogen fueling, because that makes the most sense from a PAX, a payload size, but look at what the impact that does on that regional sector, right? You're now saying that deviation, Courtney, you know this, airports that you deviate for flight planning have to be compatible for refueling, electric and hydrogen and everything else. So does that mean your small little airports in Timbuktu now are required as a deviation airport? So there's a lot of things here that I think are, for those that who say, well, why don't we just come with battery packs in the back of an aircraft? It's easier than done. I mean, the industry is 4,000% focused on safety. You don't put anything up there until it had the redundancy and systems that keep people alive. If we all buy Priuses and we go drive on the highway and the Prius breaks down, we pull off to the side and we sit there and we don't die. If you're on a plane that has a battery failure or some other kind of mechanical failure based on a sustainable fueling system, things don't go so well. So it is, I think, to answer that sustainability evolution is tough. It's challenging. We need a goal. We need something to aspire towards. But it makes people get at, Garrick, people ask us all the time as far as the values of aircraft. Well, I'm not going to start taking the aircraft values down because right now the sustainability overlay isn't strong enough to really start putting a market completely, unless you have missions that are just 707s or like that, but that doesn't exist anymore. I think most of our aircraft and most of the metal that's being flown right now is generally okay. I mean, I think
it's hard to quantify those, right? The sustainability piece to it, to kind of go, yeah, you know what, in 10 years time, right, that'll impact the value of an airplane by this much. It's like, well, it's still too many unknowns in terms of what the next 10 years look like.
Do you feel, for lack of a better term, I'll use the word pressure. Do you feel a pressure to consider that in your valuations? And the reason why I hesitate on the word pressure, because you immediately think of somebody being like, hey, you need to do this. But it's not that. It's just more kind of the collective idea of, hey, if this is the future, shouldn't we be considering that it will be here?
I mean, that you can't be Pollyanna and just put your head in the sand and say it doesn't exist. I mean, we are the aviation industry is so much pressure, right? Like we're 2% of global emissions now, and be like, well, that's not a lot. I said, well, maybe it's not a lot today, but tomorrow every other industry is going to be better than us. So our 2% turns into 4%, turns into 10%, and so
that sounds terrible.
It sounds horrible. No, I mean, it sounds, but
the reason it sounds terrible is because overall global emissions are dropping so fast that we as a relative rise.
Right. Exactly.
And there's far less carbon if that happens, right? I mean, there's a lot of other things that need to happen. I'm not pushing back from any specific angle here. I'm just more interested in how. Right? It's long been said that you'll know when certain things are happening in the industry when the appraisers are willing to put values that include this change. We haven't really seen that yet. Really, that's kind of the direction of the question.
But there's no technology to supersede, right? I mean, the way we always look at it is that evolution of technology sunset. And the horizon. So until there is something on the horizon that says this is the new 797 hydrogen-powered aircraft and it's the be-all, end-all, and that entry into service is in 10 years' time, watch out, be prepared. And we're seeing a massive uptick and a lead into that technology from every airline. We will take note, but we can't go out there and start devaluing aircraft types until we know what the next evolution of our industry provides.
In that hypothetical where you do know, I mean, let's say the hydrogen wide body, and you say they announce a program, it's 10 years away. It delivers on September 1st, 2034. Do aircraft values on September 2nd, are they impacted? Or is it 2 years after service? Is it 10? Obviously, production rates, take rate, all that would have to do. But how would you, being today, looking at a potentially disruptive technology 10 years out, how would you consider that from the valuation perspective?
It's the market segment it's filling, the uptake, and then also the ability for that technology to prove what it's set out to provide. We've been very much believing in new technologies. I mean, let's rewind the tape 15 years ago when the Sonic Cruiser was supposed to be the new thing, right? And then the 787, now the 787 came into evolution. We were briefed on a 797.
It's actually more like 20 years ago, by the way.
20 years ago. Is that right?
I know. Yeah.
Stop it. It was like 3 years ago.
I know. It's crazy.
Yeah, I was thinking that too.
Well,
15 years ago was 2009.
Okay, yeah. They say as you get older, your mind starts to time-lapse things into chunks, and you forget that how things have passed.
I was going to mention that, Bryson, but I didn't want to confuse you.
Zip it. I don't want to hear it. Okay, so 20 years ago, sitting in the Rainbow Room on the top of Rockefeller Center, listening to the discussion around the 7E7 or the Sonic Cruiser, whatever was going to be the case, and that evolution. I think the things that we would look at is the rate of production and the ability for that aircraft type to achieve critical mass in utilization, in use. What market segment is going to take over? If it takes over a narrow body segment, it starts replacing A320s and 737s. Yeah, the spidey senses go up on that. Like, you start to look and say, okay, is this really a game changer? And we've seen those game changers as they occurred, and I don't think we even realized they were game changers until they actually changed the game. And I'll just put one kind of piece on that, which is when the A320 came in, everyone thought, oh, the A320 was competing with the 737. The A320 was competing with the 757. And all of a sudden, now you have a smaller aircraft that go further, and the 757 was this kind of wide body, narrow body hybrid kind of evolution. Like, look at this big aircraft that can fly. It's an amazing aircraft, still flies today when it's not going tech. And it is the A320 was revolutionary in its own sense, because you had now a 737-like payload flying across the country, which the 737 never did. And so it was, what are you actually competing against? And are you trying to leapfrog into creating a market that didn't exist? And that's where you have to start saying, what's happening here? So yes, in September 1st, what'd you say, what year was this again?
2034. I just added 10 to the current year.
Yeah. Could that change?
Appraiser.
Sure, it's not going to change everything at once, right? And we've also looked at, let's just call them hiccups of the evolution of new technologies that have come along with the stuff that we're dealing with now. And I think we're a little gun shy, to be honest. I mean, I think we really relied on the mantras that, well, what this did before, we'll do this again. This is not a problem, and it's been anything but not a problem.
Yeah, and that was going to be my comment to add to that as well. Is, I mean, nobody knows, so it's hard to be like, 10 years from now, right? It's more like there could be an impact to values of existing airplanes, but like nobody expected the max grounding. Nobody anticipated what happened with COVID, the OEM delay, like all these things. Like, if you were, if the anticipation was already there that, values would be impacted, right? That would have been done, early part of the last decade, and we would have been all wrong. Not that we're not, not that we weren't wrong through when when COVID started to, all of a sudden we were coming out of it. But, and that's why I think, you have to be very cautious about how quickly you make adjustments to future values. Also, I think, a lot of times the market will look at appraisers to, as indicators of like, hey, what are you guys seeing? When are you going to make changes? But in the end, like, appraisers are not meant to be we're not leading indicators, right? We're not supposed to lead the market. We're just supposed to reflect it. And people forget that. And I think but
the ones that are, the ones that really have something at stake in the game want us to lead it, and then they get yelled at for leading, we get yelled at for lagging. We have to be right there at that perfect point, but then of course our data is not always real time, and this is where I think the value that's being provided by this community is so important, because we don't have that transparency, and people think they can just go appraise aircraft and put numbers in, like, well, this is what it is, like, but you have no idea what the nuances of this market and what makes two like aircraft completely different in value.
Just one point of correction.
Are you correcting
Bryson.
Garrick or me?
No, I'm correcting you.
Okay.
No, I'm correcting Bryson.
Oh, wow.
The
Don't make me look bad.
The plural of Prius is Prii.
Well,
I looked it up. Toyota announced the plural in February 2011 after customers kept asking, and it is officially Prii. How about
I
that?
never used it in the plural. I said we each can go buy a Prius. I did not say we were all going to go buy Prii. Did I say Priuses? I didn't say Priuses, because that would make me look like
something registered.
I know, of course.
The gears were
went on the Google machine and
when you think about, the stuff that we've talked about in terms of sustainability, the challenges, all the, how do you go about like advising your clients when, with all this unknown, all this ambiguity, right? Because I'm sure, as part of your job is to kind of go, use your experience and let us know, what do you think we should do? And it's challenging, but how do you go about doing that to make sure that ultimately, you're informing your customers to make the best decisions?
Well, we first give them a 7-page limitations letter as to what we cannot provide.
Right. So it's a waiver. Sign here.
Exactly.
Liability
These are our
waiver.
limitations.
Number one of which is you cannot sue me personally for $25 million. I do not have enough pre-I to sell.
And the password is freedom. Yes. It's scenario building, to be honest. I mean, I think that's how you have to approach it. You have to. Nobody has a crystal ball, but we can look at, with certainty of our expertise, looking in the past of what's happened. Hey, this is what happened when stage 4 noise regulations came in. Mm-hmm. This was the evolution. This is what happened when these technologies came in. This is the evolution. This is our, our expert opinion as to how things could pan out with a degree of sensitivity, give or take. Obviously certain limitations and certain assumptions. I mean, it's, if the OEM supply chain should implode again, obviously this is different. But I think now, given that we know that supply chain is so fragile in some cases, or in these cases, or the evolution of regulations that confine our industry, I think we have to look at through various lenses, and that's why what we're hired to do. I mean, we're hired to bring our industry expertise, to look back and say, here's what supports this from that perspective. And given that, something 20 years ago, but the evolution is amazing. I will teach at ISTAT PDP a lot, and I love it because there's just a whole generation of younger people that are, in it to win it. They loved aviation. They're all, aviation geeks like all of us. I mean, there's jet fuel in the blood. I'm jealous of them. I'm jealous of their instant network of people like them to talk to, and their level of where they are in their career, either beginning or mid-level. That's kind of where ISTAT PDP fits in. And they love the stories. They love the anecdotal evidence, and kind of discussions around, well, this is why where we are today is an evolution of all of this. Mm-hmm. They've dropped themselves into an industry that is hundreds of years old, and just starting out and recognizing that there's a reason why things are the way they are. And people
Somebody
like us
start a podcast.
Have that. Right,
to collect these stories
about that. Yeah,
talking about the people and the stories, and their background.
Right, God,
that'd be awesome.
That would be like epic.
Epic, yeah.
You should get on that.
Yeah, we should get. All right. Well, yeah. You know what? We'll get around to it.
I love what you're describing, though, because So we brought this full circle because we opened this podcast really with you talking about you working with the generation prior and listening to those stories, right? And how Mort was able to just, he had seen enough downturns. Well, for you at the time, you hadn't. So it was new and novel to you. Well, now we're the old farts. Yep. Where we're like, oh yeah, I've seen that downturn, and I've seen 2 others before it, right? And again, full circle, you see the next generation come in, and yeah, you're old. That's it.
Yeah.
Right back at you, buddy. Right back at
thanks.
you. Mm-hmm.
We're not as old as you.
There's gray in your beard. Don't think I don't see that.
Oh, I dye it gray.
Yeah. So I said, assuming you don't retire over the next 10 years, right? Which is probably a fair assumption. What excites you about the next 10 years? Like when you think about what could happen over the course of the next 10 years, like what do you look forward to seeing develop or happen or not, or like, I think that to me is kind of like interesting to how do you foresee the future, and what kind of gets you like, oh yeah, I want to be a part of that?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a great question, and it's
a great question.
What was that? What did you say?
Yeah,
How are you patting yourself on the
in.
back on asking me a question?
It's a great question.
It's 1-to-1. It's 1-to-1, Gary.
You said it was a good question. Mine was a great question.
Oh, shit.
Yes.
All right, Bryson, you were saying.
It's interesting because I think there are things that are the resiliency of this industry, which is always mind-boggling to me. I think no matter how much they take us down, not us down, but like what COVID did to us was absolutely insane, and yet we were able to kind of rise back up. And it was we all predicted the worst because we thought we've never seen anything like this before in our lifetime. And there were other recessions that were worse than what COVID was. And I think maybe because COVID we were all in this together, and there was a solution to really come together and make sure we could survive because we are the backbone of commerce. I mean, obviously, we know how we support the world. The technology side, kind of the evolution of technology, and I think that also kind of makes things tougher for all of us because that new technology kind of evolution is even more complex to understand, right? And really what it means to the industry. I think those are the two main things. I had some things written down, and I think those are, but my computer now is shut down, so I can't see.
Yeah, we made him. That was on purpose.
Yeah.
Look, that's it. I really like kind of the direction you're going with that, right? If you consider the next 10 years, I mean, often in the context of what we were just talking about in terms of just the numbers of downturns that we've witnessed, just because, as also has been established, we're three old dudes now talking about airplanes.
Thank you very much.
So if you go forward another 10 years, what's so interesting is the number of people whose only downturn they've experienced was COVID.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens when the next one arrives? They're going to crap their pants. If that's all you've ever seen, and I'm already seeing that from expectations of, whoa, the next downturn could be crazy. How much do you think traffic could be down during the next downturn? I don't know, 50, 60%? Like, that's insane. Like, the worst we ever saw was like 10%, right?
But it was regional.
Globally.
Right, globally.
And it was regional in nature.
Yeah, exactly.
Until COVID, right? Until COVID. So there's this overcorrection, and I think where I'm kind of coming to in all of this is kind of, especially from an asset perspective, this is exactly why you have appraisers, and why it bugs me so much that so many were so quick to lower base values, because that's exactly what they were. That's what appraisers were supposed to be. They were supposed to be the kind of foundation of the value industry, and things will not change. And there was still that overreaction by some, not by all. But looking forward to 10 years, the reliance on the appraisers can only increase, right? Or ChatGPT.
Or ChatGPT,
or
your microwave might be able to do something for you.
My Prius can.
But to that point, Cordy, like after 9/11, we learned so much, and that was one of the first big.
That was a big one.
Really monumental recessions, and I remember sitting with Mort and looking at future values, and it was a learning discussion around the 747 because there were a handful. Remember, everybody had a 747 back then, and they were parked quickly because the Atlantic became a dead zone a bit, and for traffic, and the depreciation of the 747 was very shallow. Like, a lot of these aircraft run finance leases, relied on a certain kind of beginning value and end value. And because of that, a handful of these aircraft could never be traded. They literally went to the desert and sat there until the book values actually depreciated to a point. And so you recognize, okay, how do we ascertain these market segments? And that not all market segments are alike. And that has been an education for the industry because not all aircraft types go up and down together in tandem.
Right.
Your biggest and smallest aircraft have their own little kind of ecosystems when it comes to the values and how you forecast them and the sensitivity you put on them when it comes to kind of that trough peak period, those trough, So, what's the technology going to be like in 10 years' time? I mean, I see a compression of types because I don't think we're going to another A380 again, right? Like 747 ran its course and the A380 ended that chapter. So no huge extra large aircraft. Even the 777X is pushing that boundary to perhaps a size that might not be something airlines necessarily, at least, on a large ubiquity, would really want. Probably it will be essentially a great aircraft, hopefully. So where is that compression of technology going to be going forward? Because we're not going to see the largesse of some of these models anymore. And the 747 was amazing. It was the cream of the skies.
Down as the 74 hater.
Yeah. Fun fact: I've never flown on a 747-400.
What?
I know. I just like I've never been to Atlanta. I've never
makes this stuff up.
No, I'm not kidding.
Really?
I've never
really.
Nope.
Really?
Never, yeah. Really? Yes.
Really?
Never. I'm not kidding.
I'll take things that you wish you knew about your podcast host before starting for
100. Yeah, exactly.
There's a lot of things I haven't done, but that's one of them. I mean, it's one of those. It just never the airlines I flew just didn't have that airplane when I was flying.
What you can't fly Wizz Air and People's Express everywhere, Garrick, and you can't, although People's Express even has 747. So
yeah,
I mean,
isn't that their demise?
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Exactly.
No, I think that was Braniff. I think right. They won 7.4s and they kind of
Braniff. Yeah, but People's Express was up there. I think they, but you think about that. Like everybody has 747, and I think when the A380 came along, and I tell the story, it's like when the A3 came along, like the end of the market was already there. Like it was already telling. No U.S. operator barely had a 747 at that time.
Right.
So you're going to sell it to Asia and Europe? That's it? And maybe in Australia? So you're going to lose the North American market?
And they did. And that's exactly what happened, right? The entire Western Hemisphere was without an A380 customer.
And then, try to go to Delta and say you need to buy A380s. They're like, yeah, take a hike.
Here's the price. I'm going to slide it across the desk. Like, how do you get a negative price? That's right.
Right.
You're going to need to pay me to take these.
That's how you pay me. Yeah.
That's really interesting from a North American perspective as well. One, I think it's important to give Boeing credit for winning the 7E7 versus A3XX battle. Right? I mean, remember, during that time, this was the philosophy of long-haul travel. Mm-hmm. Is it going to be bigger airplanes to the hubs?
Yep.
Or is it going to be this fragmentation? The 787 did that. And, eventually, by the time it started delivering. But North America went from 6 international airlines to 3 kind of large domestic carriers. And they shrunk their largest aircraft size.
Yep.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And why? And why do we see that? And one manufacturer didn't.
Because they were probably not focused on just the U.S. Right? From their perspective, they were looking at these other carriers. These other carriers will want Middle East, Asia. They're going to want a lot of these, right? Because they're going to use that as their flagship to do all these great things. And
they were seeing 2 747s leaving LAX within an hour of each other to get to Hong Kong, Narita, or wherever. And that could be put together by one A380. Yep, totally, you're absolutely right. Yep. That's exactly what it was. But how many airlines fly that?
Hindsight's 2020 for us now. But you have to remember that Airbus had historical trends on their side. Yes, the market was declining, but you could argue, I mean, it's 747 was kind of it in that market, and the next generation should revitalize it. But just population growth, traffic growth, right? They had the numbers behind it, and Boeing were the ones that came out and they said, we think everything will change. And they were right. And for the record, was always in Camp 77 anyway. Although not all aircraft types have necessarily done that, right? The wide body was ripe for that kind of disruption. We just because it's top of mind, we have not seen that shift back in, say, the small narrow body as we did on the wide body. But again, it wasn't. It is different. So I don't think it's. I mean, we have to remember at that time, it was kind of obvious to Airbus that this would continue, even though it didn't. And they had every right to make that, to draw that trend forward, and Boeing just had the vision. I mean, I haven't said that since then, I don't think.
Yeah. That was 20 years ago. Right?
Yep.
20 plus
years
years
that's
ago.
right. It was 20 years ago. You keep on bringing that up.
I know. Yeah, that was, yeah.
But look at that. Look at that. Like the evolution of technology in our lifetime. I mean, starting with where we got the tail end of DC-8s and 727s. I mean, I flew on 727s. Garrick might not have because he's not very well traveled, apparently. But
no, I
737-200s and DC-9s, and then those there are whole generations that are doing right now who have never even touched those aircraft. And that I was at Dulles Airport, back to Dulles Airport, when the 777 debut had for United in 1995. Like I walked on that aircraft and was like, "Ooh,
it's still
this
flying,
is amazing."
by the way.
What was that?
Yeah, that airplane's still flying.
Oh yeah, and it's not 777 UA. I think it's N771 UA. Like, yeah, I've flown on that aircraft many times, and I'm like, wow, this is Anywho, that is
wow, this is cool.
This is cool 5 times over. But that evolution is insane, and that technology going forward, what we've seen in the 20 plus years that we've been doing this, it's been pretty special.
Yeah, and I kind of want to take that further because I'm often
criticized. Sorry, what?
Yes, that too, no question. Often criticized, but I'm often given the reasoning that Boeing needs to launch a new airplane because they haven't in a long time, and I don't buy it. Boeing has their own issues, different things, but the pace of technology advancements is slowing because it naturally will. We don't see the 20-30% like we saw between, say, the 737 and the 727, right? Because it's asymptotic. We can't get to negative fuel burn, right? We can't get to negative cost to operate. So we're getting closer. And as we get closer, the increment required to have somebody send everybody back through training, to acquire all these new assets and all the parts and all the spare engines that are needed with it, that becomes an obstacle that really slows down technological advancement until we see the next game changer. But then it's going to have to prove itself. Yep.
I mean, even so, being with CFM in London, and they had like this whole 3-dimensional kind of virtual reality on the unducted fan, and like this is amazing. And then you have some of them airframers like, yeah, we're not ready for that yet. Like it's theoretically could be there. It's just not. What's going to happen first? Airframers looking for that. The engine maker's like, hey, look, we have this. And is it going to be a game changer? And who's going to blink first on actually using that technology? So hopefully,
that's a great
CFM sake, it's not all for naught. It looks amazing. The thing is huge. But will it be something that passengers can get around of? Because to them, it looks like a big turboprop.
Is commercial aviation really ready to be a first adopter? And what I'm thinking of here is the unducted fan, the geared turbofan, which were decades old by the time they were put into really kind of game-changing status. Well, the unducted fan hasn't yet, but the geared turbofan, I mean, the Avros had that, right? I mean, the idea of the gear wasn't the leap in technology. It was the maturation of that technology. So how much maturation are we going to require as an industry before we adopt this next layer of technological advancements? And have they even been invented yet? This is the problem I have. I don't even know what the next technology is. We haven't decided that yet.
I think that is the pacing item, is the infrastructure. I mean, back in the day, aircraft just came up to an airport. There was a big apron. Stairs came up to it. There you go. Now the A380 can't fly everywhere. There's only ways to fit certain types of aircraft in certain areas, and the operational requirements and restrictions. So to that point once you start to get a little bit game changer and you start to really be a first mover, it's, well, where can we fly this? And maybe as long as it fits in the box, it's okay. But your ground support on a blended wing aircraft changes dramatically. That maturation and that evolution of new technology it's going to be 10 years old before the current stuff. It's going to be old before it's new.
Yeah. Well, and plus,
almost
I also
by
think
design. That's how we're safety focused above all. That's aviation.
Yeah, and I also think that the issues and the hurdles and the headaches that airlines and investors have had over the course of the last, I'd say 5-7 years, I think also slows the process, right? Because how quickly will they be willing to adopt the next latest technology when they've gone through so many issues with what was supposed to be the next technology, right? I mean, so how quickly will an airline go, oh yeah, you know what, we'll take that unducted fan.
Yep.
Absolutely. Can you guarantee that we're not going to have the same issues where all of a sudden they're going to fly for 2,000 cycles or less, and they're going to cost me 3 times as much as my other, all these things are going to be running through their head to kind of go, I know you're telling me it's 20% more efficient, but is it really?
You never had to ask that before. You're right.
And that's going to make people think, to me, I think as a, fleet guy, you're going to be going, well, it sounds great, but I'm thinking we're going to let somebody else
order
it first. Right, exactly. I'm going to let somebody else order it, and then we'll see what happens. Yeah. And then we'll come back to you. Yeah, and that I think plays a role in when that technology comes out too. Well, so I think we're getting close to our hour and a half point, if not maybe a little bit more. So I know this has definitely been fun, but we also don't want to take we could keep doing this for hours on end as we always do. So look, it's always fun. It's great to talk to you. I'm glad we got to kind of know you a little bit more. No, but this has been really fun. I'm glad you agreed to do this with us. So thank you very much for taking the time. And we certainly look forward to doing this again at some point, having you back on, kind of hearing your thoughts, and wish you the best with everything that you're doing.
Yeah, no, appreciate the invite, guys. I know when you started this, I was on the list, and I'm happy this finally came to fruition because it's been a great chat.
Yeah, that was. But we get to go next time.
We do need to have you back, Bryson. Absolutely.
This is great. Good stuff.
Yeah, thank you.
Now I'm the winner.
Here, I live in Texas. By law, I'm not allowed to have any.
Right. You get shot if you buy one. It's like, yeah. Right. Here's a Prius and a gun for your neighbor to shoot you with. All right. Good job. Go ahead. Good luck. Who knew we would still be doing this after this amount of time? I thought I'd be tired of you, 20 episodes ago. But anyway.
Yeah, it was 19.
Yeah.